Hi, and welcome to Decoding AQ, helping you to learn the tools, mindsets, and actions to thrive in an ever-changing world.
Hi, and welcome to our next episode of Decoding AQ. With me today, I have Pranav Bhanage joining us from India, and he is a speaker, he's a mentor, he's a coach, but he's also the CEO of PETRONAS, which is a global energy company with over 30,000 employees and presence in 50 countries. So welcome.
Hi, Ross. Glad to be here.
So with someone who started with a degree in engineering and chemical engineering that went off into some systems analysis and consulting time at Boston Consulting Group, over this kind of last decade that you've been at your current firm, you, as I did my internet stalking, as I do with a lot of my guests as best we can, is starting in then digital transformation and then ending up as the CEO for a division and for the South Asia region. I want to touch on an interesting part of our current times that we're facing, Pranav, at the moment, in the fact that we're living in this world of really accelerating change, increasing uncertainty everywhere, and where the ones that seem to be doing very well are the ones that are good with chaos. They're good with this flux, with this need for adaptability, and this maybe just ability to navigate that journey of consistent change with a smile. But there are others who are really struggling. And I wonder, when you look at all of that, this landscape of uncertainty and pieces, maybe 12 months ahead, what are you most excited about? What really gets you excited?
I know you've sort of framed the question in a positive way, so I like it. And but I'll contextualize a bit, Ross, before I jump into the excitement bit. So pre-COVID, we were in a pretty much a steady state. So when I decode a steady state, what I mean is that there is demand and then there's supply, and you're able to sort of assess the demand, say 3 months, 6 months, 8 months down the line, and organizations were able to plan the supplies as a 3, 6, 8, 9, 12, etc. And of course, there are some sectors you've seen exponential growths, and in some sectors you see contraction, but that was sort of more or less in a steady state.
So if you have predictability, there was a level of predictability.
Yeah. Correct. Yeah. So if you just sort of plot these two imaginary curves, they sort of go hand in hand. So they may be parallel to each other, but they're going hand in hand. I think what's happened in the last 3 years is that these curves have gone out of whack. Meaning when there is extreme demand, there is a supply constraint. When there is abundant supply, there is a demand loss. And I guess, we as individuals, as organizations, as a group or teams, we've not been exposed to this kind of a environment and a sustained environment for over a period of time. And I think therein lies the crux of what you mentioned in terms of, that's the story of our times. So how do you manage this? How do you try to predict it? In some instances, your decisions look really weird even 3 months down the line. So in this extreme sort of scenarios where these two curves are no longer congruous or no longer in line with each other, there is a big fallout on the people who are involved in this. Right from the front end sales teams, right from supply chain teams or management teams, leadership teams, each and every sort of team has had its own takeout of this challenge. And they're, sort of reeling under this continuous pressure of uncertainty. So if you take a positive spin on it, I'll go straight to your question as to what excites me about these times. Two things. This is a great time to actually to be a professional. If you broad base it, I always like to broad base things. You don't need to just look at last 1 year or 2 years. You look at a horizon of 10 to 15 years, and you say, okay, that was a blip. but you look back at the blip and you said you enjoyed it. So I think it's an exciting time because we've never been presented with this kind of a flux for a longest period of time. And it's really for professionals, for entrepreneurs, even for people like yourself, there's so much to learn through these times. And if you come out alive after 2-3 years, you can wear your badge of honor and a couple of stripes and a couple of more stripes than what you already have, or a few more feathers in your hat, and really come out as strong professionals, strong leaders, strong mentors, or even just strong individuals. I mean, if you're withstanding this opportunity or this kind of flux, it's really improving you as individuals. So that's the exciting part of it. And this is what I say to my teams as well as many a times, is that, this, just learn through it. I mean, you can attend lots of VUCA classes, or they can go to your books and literature that you have written and learn about VUCA, but it's one, learning is one, but living in a VUCA is, not everybody gets a chance. So it's our chance. We are all soldiers. This is our war, and we are in it. So I guess that's the part of the excitement, to really put your knowledge to test and see whether you can really come out of this with success, and come out of this successfully, and also as a better individual.
So the environment that you see is this opportunity to accelerate our experiential learning. And
absolutely.
I couldn't agree more. And I had a visual going on in my head as you were talking, where I was looking at a theme park in my head. And theme parks are great. They're exciting. They've got all these rides around, and I might pop on the roller coaster, then I come off, and then I'll walk somewhere else, and I'll pop on something, then I might take a break. I'll have some lunch. And the reality is that we got on the roller coaster and it's sustained on there, and we haven't been let off. And it was exciting in the moment, and it was exciting when we're there, but it's exhausting and potentially corrosive over a period of time. And that sustainment is that actually I'm not built that way. I don't know how to go to the loo. I don't know how to eat. I don't know how to perform. All of these basic things I took for granted, now in this thing that I was just hopping on for a moment, because we all have various things that come in, and we go, oh, yeah, there's an opportunity, or that didn't work, but I've learned from it. So I think the challenge then is, if we're in this theme park of which, it's a continual ride and a continual pace, how do we even take the moments to learn in that environment? How do we take the ability to reflect? How do we take those spaces when it almost feels like we're always on, we're always learning, we're always experimenting. I've got to perform, I've got to learn, I've got to do these things. And there's just pressure, pressure, pressure. Is that something that you see, or have you been able to see it differently? Because of course it's all about perspective, isn't it? So what's your thought around that?
No, I agree with you 150% here. If you just look at the evolution of humans, right? I mean, we are genetically wired and physiologically wired to take stress for a small amount of time. I mean, recently I went to a national park and saw a tiger up close. And very interestingly, a tiger can try to make a kill. He has to wait for 1.5 days to actually, get his strategy right. And then he makes that burst of that energy, that explosion of energy that happens to actually catch the prey. And if he misses it, he actually has to rest, because to come back to that from 0 to 100, it'll take another, few hours. And ironically, you would have a few deers around him, because they know that, this guy can't do much for the next 2 hours. So it's okay. So I guess, we are much like that. You can take that you cannot take the sustained stress, which you absolutely rightly identified. So how do we survive in this everlasting roller coaster? I think it's a very, very, very interesting and a poignant point, because there could be few strategies. I mean, maybe I can share a perspective from my end, but there's no right or wrong answer. Number one, which has worked for me, is, as I mentioned earlier, is broad basing. So broad basing is, you step back, And then instead of looking at 1 year, you sort of draw a line for a whole decade and see that, in that decade, this is just a small blip on a long journey. So that makes you feel a little bit more comfortable and say, okay, fine, we will sort of get away from this soon. The second thing that has worked as well is to have a sort of imagine yourself 10 years down the line. What would, say, Ross be doing? Maybe in some beautiful beach somewhere, or lying on a yacht, or wherever that is. So that gives a sense of purpose of saying that, fine, let me just get through this grind to go to that eventual goal that I have. And last but not the least, Ross, I think what I've seen is a lot of people have developed a different sense of purpose. They question their choices and careers. They've questioned their actions. They're questioning their, is it worth all this? And, they're developing new sense of purpose and saying that, okay, let me just use this opportunity to pivot myself into something else, which I always wanted to do. And now it's suddenly sort of, flashing before my eyes. So different sort of ways of going through it. These are all the positive ways of going through it. But on the flip side, I must add that, there are people who have, taken some extreme steps. There are people who have really gone into depression.
Yeah.
There's a lot of the negativity around as well.
And I think the reality of that is around who are we surrounding ourselves with? And we need,
correct,
people that we can serve, that we can help, and equally gift others that can serve us by being the person they're serving, in that continual kind of change, and see that not as a bad thing, but all of it is service. To be able to be helped by someone else is a two-way act.
Absolutely.
Of that. And I think some of these challenges of where we see someone, they're having a bad time or they're having a good time, and we kind of judge those two things as good and bad, rather than just experiences, both of which can be wholesome, both of which could be enriching if we can have some perspective about it. Now, it might be easy to see or say these things when you're not inside that situation. So if we see and observe some others that might be finding this disconnect, they might be then showing up of, I've been on this roller coaster, I've decided it's not for me, I'm a disconnect from this purpose, and I want to reset.
Reset.
That reset might come because it's slapped us in the face and said, oi, I'm going to take your health away, so you have to reset. A burnout, a piece, or maybe you are able to head it off early, a little bit upstream, before it becomes a real burning platform.
Right.
That early warning signs that are there, and I guess you see it around your team where they're facing challenges, they're facing these obstacles, and they kind of show up in a few different ways for us, don't they? These obstacles. And the way in which we make decisions, I want to laser in on a bit of your perspective here, because you mentioned about the lion and his prey, or the tiger and his prey, and building up and then needing to rest. A lot of this challenge that we face when a change comes along is we see it and we're instantly fearful, because we yearn and we're built in our way to avoid things that are strange. We see them, if they're different, as fearful, and we get the amygdala hijack. We go into a stress response, and our decision making is impaired.
It's colored.
So if we're really on this roller coaster, how can you make good decisions when you're in that? And maybe a lot of these decisions that are happening, of the great resignation, of disconnect, of purpose, of all of those things, do we need to rest first before decision, or do we need to make those things? What's the kind of view on decision making in high stress environments?
Very, very good point. Maybe I'll just, I picked up two sort of things I wanted to touch upon. One was early warning signs. I think maybe I can share a perspective. Second, I'll of course come on the decisions. I guess it's very, very, very relevant and important for, say, even managers, or even as say parents or fathers or sisters or brothers that we are, to really have an antenna for early warning signs. They're not that easy to spot. They on the most easiest way, you can always say somebody's become very quiet or he or she doesn't engage, but I guess those could be misleading. And there is a need for the seniors in the house, or the sort of the more experienced people, to really keep their eyes and ears open to see what's happening around them, to the people that they work with, or the people that they love, because it's important. And there are enough and more examples that I've seen in the last 2 to 3.5 years where people have just completely lost their bearings and gone 180 degrees in a different direction. So it's important to keep an eye on it. What those are, I mean, I'm not an expert, but definitely, some part of your brain can sense, if something is amiss. On the decisions, Ross, I think, well, hindsight is 20/20 on most of the decisions, but I guess in what's happening right now, I think there are 2 or 3 important elements we need to keep in mind when you're making decisions. Number one, which is that some of the decisions may go wrong, and having that faith and having that heart to actually say, fine, this is a portfolio. Out of 10, at least 3 or 4 are going to go wrong, because we are just in those times where there is no steady state. So all the variables are changing. So number one is that having that, I guess, that mental makeup and that trust within the team that, hey, listen, it's okay. We're going to at least have 20-30% of misfires, and that's fine. Number two, I guess, where the good is getting separated, or the greats are getting separated from the good, are having good access to data. You've written a lot on artificial intelligence and allied topics. Having good access to data, having a good, stable way to actually decipher data, take a position as to what may or may not happen, and thereby quickly sort of make a call. And the third is having flexibility in the decisions. I think we have sort of moved away from the realm of 15 years capex and you'll reap the benefit at the end of 7th year. I guess that's really going out of the window as I see it. So how do you break those long decisions into a series of small steps and have enough pivots and flexibility so that you don't really get into a very bad position where you have to really write off all that you've earned in the last 20 years. So I guess those are 2 or 3 factors which are creeping into decision making. And I think the people or guys who are able to do it are able to really make good use of this crisis.
I think it's an interesting one, isn't it, where we talk about this balance of zoom in, zoom out, or think long, plan short, or prepare for, okay, we're going to do some of these things and failure is good, we're going to learn from it, all of these things. And we try to build that in a culture, but do we go far enough? So where we have this balance between performing and learning, right? If it's in sports or if it's in the arts or whatever, we have a period where we're doing practice, we're doing learning, and then we go and do a performance. We'll do the performance and we're expected to get an outcome, an applause, a result. And whilst in doing that itself as that act, we're still learning. But the difference is the outcome is what is being measured on the performance. When we're in the learning mode, the outcome is progress. In business, I think there's a real challenge with that at the moment, is that what I've observed is I still see so much of the applause, the results, and the outcomes being on performance, not on progress, not on the learnings, not on the gains. So we talk about, oh yes, we got to learn fast, fail cheap, fail quick, all of those things. But do we reward it enough? Do we structure it enough? Or are we still so structured around the reward systems of the old that is about the outcome? Because that's what we need in business, right? We need the outcomes. What's your view of that kind of paradox of sort of this holding space for those 2 things of really rewarding learning and expecting failure and maybe even celebrating it, and then rewarding and celebrating the hitting the goal, the end result, the outcome. What's your thoughts on that?
See, I always like to box it in two ways. So the reason of existence of any business is to make profit and to have cash to run. That's basic. Whether you're a one-man show or a 10,000 strong company or whatever that is.
It's value creation. Yeah.
I mean, value creation is a
maybe broad brush.
Nice term. Nice term.
We need the cash. We need the financial aspect. Yeah.
The cash is, any business needs to have cash, and it should be for profit. Even you can wisely decide how to use that profit. You can give it to the society. I think that's step 2. Now, to come back to your question, when I say I box it in 2 ways, is this fundamental frame is important. Now, if you have this frame, then you can have the behaviors that you want to drive. So for example, if you're a very profitable company, let's say take the Google or the Microsofts, etc. For sure, I mean, they need to give the platform for people to run and make 25 different products, out of which 24 will fail, but one will be that big killer product. And these kind of companies can afford to have the playground for fail fast, fail cheap, throw a few $1 million down the toilet. It's fine. We measure progress. And like you said, I mean, if you're doing Macbeth, your version 10 is better than version 1. So that's great. Now, in another context, if this basic fundamental is not there, no matter what business we are, whether it's soft drinks or whether it's glasses or whether it's books or you're a law firm or whatever that is, if you don't have the money and if you don't have the profits, okay, then all the bets are off. All the bets are off. No matter how much you want to learn, how much you want to, improve or how you want to get a pet-friendly office, or you want to take dogs to work, you want to have soft drinks for lunch, whatever. All bets are off because the basic wheel is not in place. So I come from pretty much traditional setup, right? So consulting, traditional setup, a traditional listed company, so very traditional mindset. And I always argue this fact that, okay, you need that basic frame to be right, and then you have all the rights to experiment. But what I'm seeing increasingly is I think we are losing the purpose. I mean, having 3 days work, or like having take your dogs to work, or if that's not business. That comes as your culture, but for that you need to have a sustained business model. So in conclusion to what you shared, I'm fully for the fact that we should give rewards on improvement. There has to be certain amount of rewards, certain amount of recognition, certain amount of platform for improvement, for efforts taken, for inputs. But at the end of the day, the outputs have to be there. Without that, I guess you can get onto this. Of course, if you have external money and somebody's pumping money into your business, that's fine. But again, it's not good in the sense that you're missing the core. Why did businesses come? You buy something at 100, you sell at 150. That's why you have business. You can't buy at 100, you sell it at 50, and then I have the best work environment for everybody. I think it's going to last for like 6 months.
Yeah, it's this interesting sort of paradox, isn't it, of the structure of kind of 2 innovation behaviors of how do we utilize and improve. So we're looking at productivity and efficiency of our core. So we extend the value over time of what we've got. And then our explore and transform. What's the new things that are coming next? Yeah. And that's for every individual, for every team, absolutely, for every company, absolutely, so that we, sharpen the saw whilst also playing with another tool to see at what point does the saw now no longer serve us in our thing. And I guess that's the journey of life that we go through. And it's at these various disruption points when we might get that a bit wrong. So if we have curtailed our innovation and the way we produce value now suddenly has shifted in the industry, then that's a dangerous point. And I guess the balance of a leader is to play those two instruments
sure.
of it. And I think one of the things that we found around adaptability and understanding adaptable intelligence is to map that against the context. And where we have abilities and we have character, we also have an environment. What's the environment of when that change is required and when it isn't? And so I want to ask a question actually around where we take our information from. You talked about data, and a lot of it is noise, isn't it? A lot of all this information that comes in. What are you listening to right now? What are the areas of information that you're learning from, that maybe your mentors or your coaches, or that you're really fascinated as an individual, as you, that is shaping your mindset and your thinking?
Sure. I'll just take one shot at what you mentioned about innovation before I go to the data inputs. To me, when I look at organizations, I think usually there are 3 or 4 organizations within the organization. So the core, which is essentially what's actually paying the bills today, is the core. That has to be improved and it has to be made more and more efficient. But at the same time, I think, as you've rightly said, it is, I mean, there is no way out of this, but every organization needs to have another organization which is thinking about something which will happen in 3 years' time, and that will become the P&L of the future. So that kind of environment creation, I think that's that every leader in every company, in every industry, he or she has to make that happen. So there is no more excuse for saying that, let me just focus on my core, because like you rightly said, tomorrow something may just go upside down, and suddenly what you have is no longer relevant. So that's a great point. I think coming to the fact of picking up information, that's a bit of a tricky one to answer. But I guess let me sort of try to frame it in a way which makes sense. As an organization, there are a lot of external touch points that it has. So it has its customers, it has its consumers, it has its business partners, it could have its route to market, so it could have distributors, etc. So there's a lot of these touch points that organizations have externally. And the back end, of course, you have your vendors, you have your suppliers. You could have supplier, 2 or 3 degrees of chain that it could be at the back. What is relevant today and how organizations need to pick up information is from all these touch points. What's happening, and these are becoming more and more relevant because value chain is becoming relevant. Today the distributors may exist, tomorrow they may not, so the value chain can get disrupted. Consumers are thinking A today, B tomorrow, C day after. So prudent organizations are actually opening up all these, I would say, these touch points to capture
these feedback loops. The feedback loops of the information and data coming in.
Coming in. What's happening?
What's happening? What's going on?
Yeah. What's going on? Now, the second challenge there is, of course, how to process it. And what is noise? What is not? What is what is the flavor of the month, Baskin Robbins, or what is a structural change? So those are the difficult conversations. And for that, the organizations need to have the right platforms for discussions. Tolerate debates. Listen to people. Don't just listen to people in the boardroom. Just go and listen to people outside. Get conflicting ideas from the ground. And those are the organizations which I believe will be able to really figure out what is noise, what is a change, or rather what is a sustained, I would say, irrevocable kind of a change that is happening. And through those conversations, through those debates, when those data points are discussed and debated, a hypothesis would be formed, an insight would be generated, upon which the actions would be taken. So again, that's what differentiates good from great. I mean, everybody can listen, but very few can process, and very, very few can actually take this action on that.
Can take the
insight.
action. What happens? I want to follow up and dig a little bit deeper, if I may, in there. What happens when? So we set that up, we set that structure up, we get data in a timely manner, it's accurate, we see it, we can process it. What if it looks unexpected, something that we don't like, something that it didn't validate, our belief system, and the immune system comes along and smacks it in the face and says, oh, there must be something wrong here, or we don't need to listen to that, or whatever, which, we've all seen that kind of happen in various levels and guises of the information was there, but we didn't actually act on it. We didn't listen to it because we were maybe unable to, because our field of vision was on core or on other areas, that those early warning signals, even when we talked about earlier, how do you spot the early warning signals of a human being suffering, is that this data that's coming in, how do we spot the right early signals? I guess this is, the answer to being, a great investor in the markets or whatever it is. But that's what we're dealing with, right? Is we're trying to predict an outcome in an ever-changing, uncertain world from data that is, relevant now, but might be less relevant in a week's time. So it's tough, right, to really deal with that. What are some of the principles you maybe put in place to deal with that on the nitty-gritty side of the data? That, okay, we can have that theory and that framework, but when it's challenging, when it doesn't look right, when it's maybe the first response is to be in defense mode, what are the things we can do there?
So if you look at some of the principles which are relevant, number one, and I mentioned this earlier in my comment, is to have a team that tolerates debate. Why this is more and more relevant process, that we are no longer in the world where the leaders or the so-called leadership team or the executive committee or Marcom, whatever you call it, they are not the 15 wise people who are going to navigate the ship anymore. I guess that culture has to move on. So that toleration of debate, where you get counterfactuals or you get these kind of data which like you said, it sort of knocks you off your perch and says, hey, I was wrong all the while. The reason why people don't act upon it is because the culture to actually bring that counterpoint may not be there, may not be tolerated. Now, let's say if I'm reporting to you and I say, Ross, next in 6 months, you don't need to do this like this. It has to be a metaverse. And you would say, if you're an open boss, I can go and tell you that, and we can have a nice chat. If you're not, I would just keep quiet and say, oh, well, let's watch this. Let's watch this play out like a slow motion train wreck and see what happens. So the culture, and going back to some of the culture points you mentioned earlier, what do you define as culture? Is culture where people call spade a spade. They are able to put their views without getting sort of knocked on their head for saying something that was not said in a diplomatic way, or blah blah blah. Second, the ability of the leadership team then to prioritize within the priority, which means that you would have 3 or 4 views, and then you got to take a position on something and say, okay, let's go and do this. So that's the second point why companies may not be able to act on that really aha moment, because how do you get the whole machinery to then go and execute on the idea that you have? So again, going back to this metaverse example, can you get the entire organization of yours to go and really put the money where your mouth is. And as the organizations are big and large, of course, it's very complex, but you've got to take everybody along the journey. And last but not the least is also the sort of fear of failure, right? I mean, maybe you convince the board and say, hey, this is metaverse, this is the next best thing. And after 6 months, everything is dead. And then the board looks at you and say, hey, what happened there? So I guess those three things in terms of having the right platform, an open culture for tolerating debate, B, then actually having that will to put the team and go after that insight, and 3, having the right environment which lets you sort of test it out. So those 3 things could translate into why some companies could do it and some couldn't. And just to conclude my point, I think it's also true in our personal lives. I mean, it's the same thing, right? I mean, you know that yoga is good for you, but you actually don't do it because you don't have the intent. But the data says is jolly good. You got to do it. The data just, the irrefutable fact that you got to do it, but you don't because you have, whatever reasons that you want to find. So it's true. Organizations, individuals, the same principles would hold true.
It's interesting, isn't it, when we're looking at behavioral shift here for trying new things. And I guess for us, we have these data points. We measure someone's ability to unlearn, to let go of something. We measure their mental flexibility. We measure the, team psychological safety, and all of these things get into a place where it's actually a muscle that you build. And maybe it's a way of, okay, start with some of the small bits that you can experiment with rather than trying to reenact a shift across the entire organization from that. And you mentioned about, having a few of these things that go on and recognizing a few won't work. Maybe that can just be in our behaviors and our actions. And okay, let's put that little bit of data. It's so counterintuitive. It really scares me. But what if it was true? Could we put a little bit out there to see if that is the horse we should be on, rather than it's left and we can't get on it anymore? So I think that balance of, picking where and when to build up those little muscles, because then the culture that we get easier to unlearn. We get less, this sunk cost fallacy of, we've always done it this way. All of these things has killed so many, but it's also made so many successful. So that in itself is the dichotomy and the beauty of the journey of life, right? Of these things. The last thing.
And that's where the leadership also comes in, right? Because you need those leaders to say, okay, let's go behind this. Because now after every debate, I'm convinced that this is the way it should be. And I'm going to take everybody on this chain of events. So
we need direction and we need decisions, and they're hard. Decisions,
they're hard,
they're very hard. Decidera is to cut off. It's to say no to things. So a decision is exhausting. So it's a bit like, we can have decision fatigue. The tiger that's been run after. It's exhausting. So making just a few really good ones and just being okay with that, I think, it's a great skill for leaders to be able to do that. And once the decision is there, inspire and enable not just compliance, but flow through understanding the complementing natures of how to connect with somebody. Do they need, this is going to be about make this change and you will win this because that's the way that they'll shift? Or is it make this change and we'll protect something you love? The same change, but delivered to be complementing in flow with the, ways in which they would get behind you and trust you, that matters to them. So my last piece is a link to curiosity and learning. And it's, when was the last time you did something for the first time, and what was it?
That's a good question. So in these so many lockdowns, I've forgotten how many lockdowns that we've had, I started to take up to play synthesizer. So I just never knew how to use the left hand and the right hand and the synchronization of it. And I had actually bought one for my kid, and he didn't bother much. So I thought, why don't I use it? Because it's a sunk cost fallacy, right? So I've already spent a lot of money on that stuff. It's lying there, and it's in my bedroom. So I started to do it, and I think that in that process, not that I'm good enough to go on a stage, but what I realize is that it's actually exponential curve. Any new learning, if you analyze the learning curve, is exponential. So the first year was incredibly hard, where you go like ta ta, C sharp, oh, okay. Then you go like, okay, now I don't even need to look at the keys, and I think something will sound melodious, even if it's may not be very good, but at least it's not a cacophony. So I guess that the first almost 3/4 of the journey is pretty flat, and then it sort of shoots up to the point where you say, yeah, okay, now it sort of makes sense. And therein is the learning, right? I mean, you got to go through that rough patch to come out and say, okay, at least I got some new skill. Of course, it will not pay for my daily bread and for my electricity bills, but at least it gives me some pleasure.
But it will affect, like for all of us, our mindset. When we're young, we're super curious. We're playing at everything and we're learning bits, and some get thrown out to the frustration of our parents that they've spent all of whatever time, resources and money into making that happen. But all of it is additive, and this ability to meet things with a playful mind, with intrigue, with a naive set of eyes into something is a beautiful way to live life. And I love to explore that conversation of maintaining this curiosity, to go and try the clothes on of a new task, a new role, a new way of doing things. And there are a few areas where it's life and death, but for many people it isn't, and we take things almost too seriously. That brings out the, just the exhaustion than bringing joy, bringing that playful. It's the last chapter of my book. I talk about the Monkey King, and being able to, in those heightened moments of absolute death and fear, can you still be playful? So if we have these decisions that we feel in that moment are so critical, can we still see it through a curious, naive, joyful eye?
Absolutely.
I think is a place to maybe allow us to have this journey of life that is one in lightness and not in dark places and sharp objects.
True. And that's where Ross humor comes in. I mean, if you're able to, if you are able to abstract yourself or take yourself out of the situation and make fun of the situation, I think it really lightens up the whole thing. I mean, it's very hard to do. So, I mean, humor also has that Maslow's law, right? So you have the slapstick at the bottom, and then you have this really dark British humor at the top of it, where you make fun about death and funerals and stuff like that. But that's the point where you're able to, if you can take yourself out of that situation and then look back or sort of reflect on the situation and make fun of the situation, it's really comes out very, very, very strong. And like you said, then it almost becomes like a sort of a, hey, what, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's not life and
death. You can take it seriously, but you don't have to let that rule your behaviors and the way you do it.
Yeah.
And there was a recommendation that someone wrote about you that made me smile, and it was, he knows how to motivate a team and carry them along the way to achieve the goals. He's a great down-to-earth communicator, a person with meticulous analytical skill, open-mindedness, but a healthy dose of a sense of humor. And I think that's a really great piece for leadership, isn't it? Is that we can understand how to motivate people. We can be on their level, down to earth. We're all human beings. How we serve somebody that is reporting to us in one guise is actually, we're all working to the same piece, and do that with some detail, but also a healthy sense of humor and a bit of open-mindedness. It's been a real pleasure and intriguing to understand your own experiences and perspectives. And I've got great confidence that our audience have got many things from you that they'll contemplate, that they'll reflect on, and that hopefully their version of themselves they see in 10 years' time is a little more close to what they're going to be able to plot along the way. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ross. Appreciate it.
Do you have the level of adaptability to survive and thrive the rapid changes ahead? Has your resilience got more comeback than a yo-yo? Do you have the ability to unlearn in order to reskill, upskill and break through? Find out today and uncover your adaptability profile and score, your AQ. Visit AQai.io to gain your personalized report across 15 scientifically validated dimensions of adaptability. For a limited time, enter code PODCAST65 for a complimentary AQME assessment. AQai, transforming the way people, teams and organizations navigate change. Thank you for listening to this episode of Decoding AQ. Please make sure you subscribe on your favorite podcast directory, and we'd love to hear your feedback. Please do leave a review and be sure to tune in next time for more insights from our amazing guests.